In today's video, I'm going to show you how to create a nice line chart with ggplot. We're going to build a ggplot from scratch, which means that we start at the data, started with the standard default theme from ggplot, and then we're going to add nicer labels, nicer colors, throw in a couple of extra tricks like coloring areas between lines differently, or adding call out boxes to your plot. So all of this is what we're going to do into this video. In case you don't know me, my name is Albert Rapp. I am a mathematician and data scientist, and on this channel I help our users get better with typical data science tasks like creating nicer line charts to communicate their insights. So let's see what we can do there. So in our studio, let us start with a new code chunk and in there load the tidyverse, because this is what we're going to use to create the plots and do all the data wrangling, obviously. And then we also need data. So let us take a look at the SP500 dataset from the GT package. And if you execute all of that, you will see that you will get a table with a couple of columns, date, open, high, and so on. And from that, we can select a couple of columns, namely the date, open and close columns. And let us try to be specific and focus only on a couple of dates, namely those that are in the year 2014 and that are in January. And if we execute this, we get the opening and closing prices of the SP500 in January of 2014. So this is our data set that we're going to use for creating a line chart. So let's save this into a new variable. I call it SP500 data wide because it is in a wide format and I will have to rearrange everything in a sec, but we'll also need this wide data set later on. So we'll need this intermediate variable. Now what we can do with that is we can take the data set and pass it to pivot longer to get it into a long format. Here we'll rearrange everything but the date column. And if we execute it like this, we'll see that everything gets rearranged and we have the new column names name and value, which are not particularly descriptive. So let us call them type and price. Now this data set is in a long format and it's also one format that ggplot can work with, because now we can map the type column to some aesthetic and we'll get different, for example, colors based on whether this thing says open or close. So this is why this long format is so important, and we can save our data into this data set that we call SP500 data now. So let's execute this so that we have this variable later on, and let's create a new code chunk where we can work on the ggplot. So what we're going to do is we're taking our data set, we pass this to ggplot, and then we specify the aesthetic that we want to use. On the x-axis we want to use the date, on the y-axis we want to use the price, and for color we want to use the type. That way we get one colored line for each of open and close. And if we now add a GM line layer, we do get a GM line chart. We can even make the line move a little bit nicer here. Obviously this line chart isn't particularly nice, so let's fix that. Let's start with something simple like applying a theme minimal, where we just increase the base size and set a nicer font family. And if we execute this, you can see now that all the font became a little bit larger. Let's make this even larger. So that even if you watch this on mobile, you can read what is in the plot area here. This one is really crucial, making the fonts large. I mean, not that you can read it on your phone, but in general, so many people forget that you might want to show a chart in a talk where a lot of people will be in the back of the room and can't read a thing. So this is why it's always need to increase the base font size so that you're sure that everyone can read everything. Anyway, this theme minimal is nice, but it uses way too many grid lines. I don't know why this is the default. So this is why I always add my theme adjustments on top of that, where I remove the minor grid lines, and that way I have fewer grid lines. All right, so let me make some room here so that we can still see everything. And now let's work on nicer colors. By default, you will get colors that look like this, but they are not particularly nice. So this is why it makes sense to just put in a little bit of effort and use different colors. My go-to color palette is the Okabe Ito color palette because it's colorblind friendly, and more often than not I just throw it in there by adding a scale color manual layer and specifying the values where I pass in a vector of hex codes. And now if I execute this, we'll get different colors. And now that this is done, we can work on the labels. Here I want to remove the labels for the X and Y aesthetic, and by the labels I mean the things that are in the title. I still want to show the dates and the numbers, but by design everyone can understand that Jan 06 will be a date, and the thing that we have on the left will also modify it so that it's obvious that it is a price thing. So this is why it doesn't make sense to use that room for these titles here. So this is why I often remove them. But if you do that, you will have to make sure that your title has the information that the reader will need. So here I'll just say SP500 prices in January 2014. And to bring home the point that the thing on the y-axis are truly prices, let us modify the things that are on the y-axis via the scale y continuous layer, and in there we can specify the labels by setting that argument to a function that can modify labels. In this case, we can just use one of the many functions from the scales package, and here I will just use the built-in label dollar function, because this function here, it creates a function that can turn anything it gets into a dollar, or at least any number it gets, and this is exactly what the labels argument wants. And if you execute this, you'll see that all the labels were transformed to some nicer text that has dollar signs and commas in there, and all of that worked because this function, or more importantly, the result of this function, was used as the transformer of the numbers. I'm pointing out that this thing gives us a function back because it's really easy to misunderstand this. Basically, this function is just a generator of functions. You see the output of that function is a function, and this function, so this thing here, is what is then put into the labels argument of scale y continuous. And when you put in a function into labels, then ggplot will understand, okay, this is the thing that should be applied on all of the labels that we have. And whatever comes out of that function that we apply, these are the labels we're supposed to use. So better make sure to use a function here that can take any text and make it into a string that you actually want to see in the plot. Anyway, let us move on with the chart, and now let us get rid of the legend. Get rid of the legends, you say? I can hear your skepticism, but legends are really bad because they just take up so much space on your plot, and they can more often than not be replaced with something else. Here I just want to put in text labels into the plot itself instead of having this huge bulky legend on the right. An easy way to do that is to just add a GM text layer and in there specify all the things that you want to label. In this case, we need to take our SP500 dataset and filter it so that it only has one observation per type. And since I'm using slice head here and I know that my dataset is sorted, I will know that I will immediately get the data that corresponds to the dates that are right at the right edge of my plot here. So if I execute just this part here, you see that we get the prices of the opening and closing type for January 31st. And with the smaller data set, we can now just specify additional aesthetics that GM text needs. And in this case, it is the label aesthetic. And we'll just say, you know what, just put whatever is in the type column into the plot. If we do that, we see that, okay, I forgot a plus here. Let's just make it like that. Then you still see that the theme might be correct again, but the opening and closing labels, they are really small and we have to make them nicer. So let's just apply a couple of changes. Namely, let's just left align everything so that the labels are actually next to the lines. We can also bottom align them so that everything moves a little bit to the top. But more importantly, we want to have a nicer font. And of course, we want to have larger fonts. Here, we might also want to move the labels a little bit away from the line. And that way there's a little bit more space. But most important of all, we need to make sure that we can actually see the labels fully. So this is why we get rid of the legend first. And then we'll see if we have to put in a little bit of extra padding here. And to get rid of the legend first, all we have to do is to modify our theme here by throwing a legend position none in there. And that way the theme is gone. And now to throw in a little bit of padding on the right so that we can see the labels fully, let us throw in a scale X date layer. Here we need a scale X date layer because what we have on the x-axis are dates and not just something regularly continuous, but instead dates, which are always a bit of a special format. In any case, in that layer, we can specify the limits, and there we'll just say that the lower limit is January 1st, 2014. We'll use the make date function from the LubriDate package that does nothing but generate dates for us. And for the end date, we can use, say, February the 3rd. And with that, we hopefully have enough space. Yep, this looks good. And now we do have the direct labels there. So as you can see, we didn't need a legend at all here, like the typical legend with a lot of space on the right. I mean, we can just throw in a little bit of room at the end of the lines to have the colors right there where they are needed. It comes with the additional benefit of the reader not having to go back and forth between the legend to figure out, okay, this color is that line, okay, that line is this color, this means in the legend it's that, I forgot the color again. At least that's what happens to me, so this is why I always prefer direct labels like that. But the labels here are not particularly nice, so let's just make them a little bit nicer, and for that let us just change the underlying data inside of our data set. So here we can just modify what we have in our SP500 dataset and make sure that whatever is in type has some nicer names in it. So let's create a new dataset. Let's call it SP500 data with nicer labels. And there we just take our original data, pass it to mutate, and we modify the type column that already exists using the if-else function, where we check if what is currently in the type column corresponds to open. And if so, let's just put opening price in there. And if open is not in that column, then we'll just use closing price. And with that, if we execute this, we see that our data set now has the nicer labels in there. And now all that's left to do is to replace the data sets. Let's make some room here. And now if we execute all of this, then we do have nicer labels, but they also need more room. And we could fix that by just throwing in some other larger date in here. And that way everything becomes more legible. And with more legible, I mean legible at all. Next, let me show you a really cool trick using one of my favorite packages. You see right now the labels are there on the right, and we had to throw in a lot of extra space to make sure that the full label fits in there. But how great would it be if we can just put the labels right next to the lines or even on top of the lines so that it looks like the labels are actually part of the line. And this is exactly what GM text path can do, because this package allows you to place text along any line that you can think of. So let us just replace our GM text layer with something from the GM text package. So here we replaced GM text with GM text line from the GM text path, and we don't need to slice our initial data set anymore, because GM text line just wants to have the full data so that it knows where the line is. And now if we re-execute this code, we'll see that first all the labels are crammed together on the left here. That's not nice. And also we see that there's an unknown parameter, nudge x isn't available here, so let's get rid of that first. And then we see the warnings that the letters are really displaced, which we could have figured out if we just looked at the plot, but apparently there is also a warning message for that. Anyhow, what we can do is to make maybe the labels a little bit smaller, and then also adjust the hJust value, because this one determines where the labels are located along the line. So hJust 0 means that the labels are right at the left of the line, and hJust 1 means that they are at the right end of the line. So here I want to have the labels somewhere like 3/4 of the way. So let's just go with 0.75 here. And you can probably tell already the position for the opening price label is kind of nice, but for the closing price, it's not very nice. So we have to kind of treat them separately. And for that, let us just throw in a filter call into our data argument so that we first only have the opening price. And then we can just take this thing here and throw this in here and think about the closing price. So the first thing I want to do with the closing price is that I want to make vjust into 1 so that the line is on top of the text and not the other way around. And then I also see that the line here is really jagged, and this doesn't make for really nice text if the text really follows closely to the original line. And that's why GM text line, if you look at the documentation, it has a couple of arguments that help with that. And one of them is text smoothing. This argument allows you to act as if the text had to be on a smoother, less jagged line than what we actually have, if the label had to be placed on top of that line. And that way you usually get a nicer look of your label. But this also comes of the trade-off that you also have to specify an offset, because your label is often so smooth now that the smoothed out version of this is actually not right there where our data is. So this is why you will have to figure out parameters so that everything moves back and forth into the position that you want. So we can throw in a couple of numbers for text smoothing and offset. And if we do, we see that things moved a little bit and it looks much nicer now. We could move everything a little bit to the right. So let's just put 0.77 in here. That looks decent. I might even want to throw my other label a little bit further to the right. And yeah, for now, I'm just going to leave it like this. I am telling you right now that figuring out these numbers here is not fun. It is just a matter of just trying out values that you think might work. And the thing is, if you change one, let's just go with 30 here, you will have to often change everything, because then things might also move to the right. And this is not really what you wanted to. You wanted to have it at the position where it's at, but just not as jagged as before. But it's always a trade-off, and you have to play around with these values here until it looks like you want. Anyway, with that, we have nicer labels now, and we don't need that extra space here anymore. So let's just get rid of this scale date layer here. And now we have a nicer looking chart, and the labels seem to be really part of the actual chart, or of the actual line. So that's nice, but I can do you one better. I can show you one really cool thing that I think is kind of nice. You see, you have two lines here now, and they switch back and forth. It would be cool if the area between these two lines could be filled by the color of the line that is on top. That way it might be easier to see which one is larger at what points in time. So here, where the labels are at, you can basically see that the opening price was always larger than the closing price. So that's why we could make this whole area between these two lines orange in that case, but in some other areas of the chart, things might be the other way around. And a really cool way to make this happen is to use a package that is called ggplot2. You can find it on GitHub, and it is from Nathan Grantham? I don't know. Let's just check if it's really Nathan. It's Neil. My bad. I think as a kid I played Uncharted, and there was this character called Nathan, and I think he had some other name. Let's just figure this out. Uncharted, Nathan. Nathan Drake. It's not even close to Grantham. Okay, my complete bad. I blundered on this one. Anyway, Neil was so nice to create this package, and it helps you to create charts like these, where the areas between two lines are colored differently. Well, in this case, it's not colored, but if you look at this plot here, then you see that things are colored. And here's an example of why gmribbon is not able to do what we want here. So that's why you kind of need this extra package. My initial thought that this thing can be done with gmribbon, no need for an extra package, but as you can see, it doesn't work like that. So this is why ggplot2 is there to make that happen for us. So that's why we have ggplot2. And in case I haven't made this specific enough, if you want to use this package, you will have to install it from GitHub. You can't just do install packages. You will have to use install GitHub from the remotes package. And if you don't have that package, you will have to install that first. And then you can run this command and you will get the ggplot2 package. In any case, what we need to do in our chart is to just throw in this gmplot2 layer from the ggplot2 package. And in there, we need to specify the data that this package needs. And it needs the data in a wide format. Remember how I said that we'll need this data set in this wide format? I said that like in the beginning of this video. And the reason why we need that is for this exact purpose, because ggplot2 needs that. And the reason why ggplot2 needs that is because in this wide format, we can just ask is open smaller than close. So if you just take this data set, you could just compare the open vector with the close vector. And if you just throw in this part here and there, you get a whole lot of trues and false. And this is how ggplot2 figures out how to draw the colored areas. So that's why we need this wide data set. But this is also why we need to adjust our aesthetics to that data set. And right now for the X aesthetic, we don't have a problem because our data set still has this date column, but it doesn't have a price or a type column. So this is why in the aesthetics, we need to specify that this layer should not inherit these things from the ggplot layer. And then we specify the things that ggplot2 needs, in this case, the ymin, ymax, and it needs to know how to fill these things. And this is what we do, what I've just described. We just check whether open is less than close. And now if we execute this, you see that we do get the filled areas. We can even make them a little bit transparent. And now the only thing that is missing is to make sure that the areas use the same colors as the lines. So that's why we can just use scale color manual and repeat that. And then instead of color, we'll use fill. And now if we execute this, we see that things are in the wrong order. We see in this area that the closing prices are the lower number, and instead we want to have the area use the same color as the thing that is on top, in this case the opening price. And if we check our condition that we set here, close is on top in this condition here. So whenever this condition is true, we need to use the same color as for the opening price. I'm not 100% sure if I said it the correct way. In either case, we have to specify that these things are taken correctly. So that's why in the vector, we can just specify that when we have it true, we want to have the blue color. If we have a false, we want to have the orange color. And now things look like they should. We could have been very specific in this vector too by putting in opening price and closing price in the exact same way. I could just type closing price, there you go. Then of course everything still looks the same, but we can be sure that the things that we have specified here are exactly the colors that we want and things don't get switched up somehow. So I usually do this thing here where I name my vector that I put in here. So this right now is a named vector, so that's why you see names here. This is just a safety feature that I like to use to make sure that I use the correct colors for the things I want to use them for, and things don't get messed up just because I've listed the colors in the wrong order. So I suggest you do that too. So now you know everything you need to know about how to make these nice line breaks and how to put labels right on top of lines. Oh my, I almost forgot one specific part that I also wanted to show you, and that is how to add a callout box to a specific part of your chart. And the way to do that is to use the ggmarkCircle function from the ggforce package. And this function is actually used to put a circle on specific parts of your chart. Like for example, if you look into documentation, you will find a couple of examples where a certain area of your chart is put into a circle. There are other kinds of ggmark functions. You could put an ellipse on top of that or some convex hull or something. In any case, that's the original use. But what I like to do is to not use the circle to encircle something, but actually just place an empty circle somewhere and then have ggmarkCircle also give me these label pointers. This is not a particularly nice way to create a call out label for your chart because the controls for this description or for this pointer are a bit tricky. But in a pinch, when you don't want to do this kind of label using some other tool like Figma or so, then this can really help you out. So in our original code, what we have to do is to define a new data set for this ggmarkCircle column, because this one needs data that it will encircle. And if I just create a new fake data set that has one row in it and the two columns correspond to the X and the Y coordinates of where I want to place the circle, then I can kind of trick ggmarkCircle to throw a circle somewhere for me. And then I can specify the aesthetics, and I have to once again remove the thing that I don't want to set from the initial ggplot column or from the initial ggplot layer. And once I do that, I can also specify the label that I want to place. And here I'm going to use the text that says this area signals where the closing price or opening price was higher on a given day. And if we execute this, oh no, we can't actually execute this because there's a plus missing. But now if we do, we see that we do get a circle and we do get this pointer here. And this pointer points to, well, this text box. And once you have this initial thing, the messy part starts. First, you can change the fill aesthetic to white. This will make your circle white inside, but it also has a different color, namely a black color right now. Let's make this gray 20. And also we want to set the transparency to 1 so that we actually have a white circle. Then we can modify x0 and y0 coordinates, which serve as an anchor for where the label box is supposed to be placed. Here I've used once again trial and error to figure out how to set this thing so that I like the optics of it. But this is one of the parts where I feel like this function is really tricky, because sometimes even if you change the value, it doesn't change that much. And sometimes if you, I don't know, let's try to the 12th, then all of a sudden it jumps somewhere and it looks weird. So this is why I try to not use that function too often, but every now and then I find it really convenient, and then I will have to spend some time to tweak the parameters so that the chart at the end looks like I want. Anyway, we can also modify settings like the font family of the label. And once again, this thing jumps because now the label became smaller as the font family changed. But this will also change once we modify the things like age just, font size, and so on. But apparently this didn't really change that much. So I guess let's just put this to 14. And now it looks again like the way I want. And then there are a couple of aesthetics that refer to the connection of the label box and the circle that was drawn for you. And these all start with con dot. And here we can use the color aesthetic to change the color, to not make it black, but rather a more subtle gray. We can also change the cap value. And this one changes the amount of space between the circle and the connection line. And finally, we can also modify the expand argument, which will make the circle a little bit smaller. If you use this geomark in a natural way, where it just encircles a set of points, then this expand argument can help you to put in a little bit more padding for your points and so on. Here, we just use it to make it smaller. Once again, all of these things are a bit tricky to figure out, and it's a lot of trial and error every time I use it. But once again, I do feel like this function also gives you a whole lot. In the end, having to draw this connection line would be much more effort if you had to do it manually. So I still like this function, I just don't use it that often because sometimes I feel like it's hard to use. In any case, now I have shown you everything I wanted to show you, and with that we have completed this video. If you've enjoyed this video, then I'm certain that you're also going to love my data visualization course, which you can check out by following the link that should pop up right about now. Or if you want, you could also check out some other of my YouTube videos. There should also be a window popping up for that now. In any case, thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.